Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the day two of the virtual international conference on exploring connectivity in the Bay of Bengal region, importance of India's Northeast, organized by Observer Research Foundation, Kolkata, in collaboration with the Consulate General of Japan in Kolkata and the Ministry of External Affairs, Government of India. We had an engaging and thought-provoking program yesterday, and taking up the thread from there, we begin today's celebrations with session two of the conference on trade and development in the Northeast. I welcome our panelists for this session, Dr. Nilanjan Ghosh, Director, Observer Research Foundation, Kolkata, Mr. Taiji Onozawa, NETI Advisor and Policy Director of JETRO, New Delhi, India, Professor Nisha Taneja, Professor at the Indian Council for Research on International Economic Relations, New Delhi, India, Professor Rakhi Bhattacharya, Professor Northeast India Studies Program, Jawaharlal Nehru University, India, Professor Indranil Bhome, Professor Department of Economics, Tripura University, Agartala, and Professor Prabir De, Professor Research and Information System for Developing Countries, RIS, New Delhi. I request Professor Ghosh to chair the session. Professor Ghosh.
A very good morning to all, and it gives me immense pleasure yet again to welcome you all at this event, Exploring Connectivity in the Bay of Bengal region, Importance of India's Northeast, organized by ORF's Kolkata Center in partnership with the Consulate General of Japan in Kolkata and the Ministry of External Affairs, Government of India. Welcome to the session 2 on trade and development in the Northeast. We had a very vibrant discussion yesterday on various hues of connectivities, beginning from soft cultural to the hard physical aspects, or what we call physical capital and physical infrastructure. Now, here we come today to something extremely critical from the perspective of the economic forces of connectivity, primarily looking at this space of the Northeast. Now, if we look at the space of the Northeast, how do we essentially look at this? Are we going to look at Northeast as the critical growth hub, or is it going to be the hinterland of a broader growth hub and eventually provide the impetus or the inputs for the Bay of Bengal region and the Indian Ocean Rim? Or are we going to look at this purely from the perspective of cultural connectivity and physical infrastructure? This is also because of the fact that it's not merely trade that we should confine ourselves to, as far as to this discussion is concerned. It should essentially get into investment. Is Northeast going to be one of the destinations of foreign direct investment and private investment from various parts of the world, as also, in fact, the various parts of the Indo-Pacific, in which the Bay is going to play an important geostrategic and geoeconomic role in the coming future? As far as the Northeast is concerned, of course, it has some very enabling factors by way of which it can attract investment and also be provide the space for provision of inputs to other growth hubs. It has a rich natural capital. It has a rich culture, which provides essentially some of the critical inputs for social capital. It has, as far as human capital is concerned, large part of it is unexplored. In fact, there are developments of universities and institutions. And of course, what has been lacking so far is the physical capital or the physical infrastructure aspect, what we call the hard part or of connectivity. But that is also, in fact, has come to the forefront. So from that perspective, some of the critical drivers of trade and development need to be looked at. So is Northeast going to be a force and avenue for broader regional development, or it by itself is going to be the growth hub? That remains the question. Now, of course, this falls very much in the context of India's Act East and Neighborhood First policy. And from that perspective, Northeast is a very, very critical region to look at. On the other hand, in fact, one of the panelists mentioned yesterday, as far as the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership is concerned, or the RCEP, India has missed out on a very, very important opportunity. Of course, this debate related to RCEP goes on. Probably we can ponder a bit on that, on had this helped the Northeast, or maybe in fact certain parts of the service sector, or in fact the small and medium enterprises or micro, small and medium enterprises to fit in to the broader value chain of the ASEAN. So these are some of the crucial issues that need to be addressed as far as this session is concerned. And of course, this session, I'm sure, is going to be a great one, given the panelists that we have. Mr. Keiichi Onozawa, who happens to be a policy director of JETRO New Delhi, as also a METI advisor. Professor Nisha Taneja, professor at ICRIAR. Professor Raki Bhattacharya, who is a professor at the Northeast India Studies program at JNU. Indranil Bhaumik, Dr. Indranil Bhaumik, Associate Professor at the Department of Economics, as also the Head of Department of Economics at Tripura University, Agartala, and our very own Professor Probir De, Professor of AIC, based out of RIS in New Delhi. So, let me start with Mr. Onozawa. Mr. Onozawa, it's up to you for your deliberations. What I would suggest is it's a request to all the speakers to stick to 10 minutes, and so that we can have we can devote quite a bit of time to questions, answers, and discussions at the end of your discussions. So, Mr. Onozawa, it's up to you.
Thank you very much for inviting me. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, we can see you and we can hear you properly as well.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Keiichi Onozawa. I'm the METI advisor and also the policy director of JETRO. JETRO is a PSU under METI, Ministry of Economic Trade and Industry. So in order to enhance the trade, investment, and development of Northeast region, inviting the industry to that region is very effective. So today I want to explain about how to invite more Japanese companies into Northeast region. I want to explain 3 points, namely improving connectivity, taking advantage of human resources, and ensuring safety. So let me start from the first point. First of all, developing infrastructures and enhancing connectivity is most important. I want to introduce Japan's experience. Japan has been growing rapidly in the 1960s and 70s. The growth rate was around 10% on average. Connectivity played one of the main roles to realize this rapid growth. Japan has several big cities such as Tokyo, Nagoya, Osaka, Kitakyushu. We connected these cities through highways, roads, railways, and high-speed railways. And this area is called Taiheiyo Belt Road. Connectivity facilitated the economic integration between large cities, and those cities divided their roles. Prioritization is the key to become competitiveness because we can enjoy scale economy. This is why Japan proposed and has been promoting and contributing to Delhi-Mumbai Industrial Corridor project. Similarly, Eastern Corridor is supported by World Bank. Japanese government and JICA has been contributing to many infrastructure projects in Northeast region. JICA is supporting building roads and bridges in Meghalaya, Mizoram, Tripura, and Assam, etc. Northeast region should take advantage of its geographical location. Northeast region can connect India and ASEAN. There are several connectivity projects between Northeast region in India and ASEAN, including BCIN, trilateral highways, etc. These projects will boost the economy in Northeast region. In order to take advantage of the scale economy, each state in Northeast region in India and ASEAN must be connected to other areas. To take an example, Japanese automotive company Honda built a factory in Bangladesh in November 2018. and they started to exchange parts between Manesar factory and Bangladesh factory. It is a division of role and prioritization between those factories. That is why they can make the cost cheaper than before. This type of economic integration is important to boost the economic growth and improve the competitiveness and attractiveness. Connectivity is not limited to physical infrastructure. Trade facilitation is also important, such as BBIN, motor vehicle agreement, etc. So this type of harmonization is very important. So let's move on to the second point, taking advantage of human resources. For Japanese companies, qualities of human resources are really important. Among Japanese companies, the reputation of human resources from Northeast region is very high. To take an example, Maruti Suzuki, AOTS Japan, and IIT Guwahati announced collaboration for promoting technical education and training on March 2020. They facilitated education and training courses covering engineering and internship programs in both India and in Japan. They will also promote research for next generation technologies for benefit of both countries. Japanese companies see potential in Northeast region's human resource. To take advantage of human resources, labor regulation is very important. For example, many Japanese companies are worried about Haryana State. Haryana State recently announced to force companies to hire at least 75% from local staffs. So companies usually try to maximize the quality of workers. So they tend to hire a lot of staff from other states. This is not limited to Haryana State, but this is common among every state in India. So I guess maybe Haryana State's new policy will stop the inflow of companies into that state. I even think some companies will shift their factories to other states. I want to raise another example of Bangladesh. Let's imagine why Bangladesh is strong in apparel industry. For example, we can see a lot of international companies such as Zara, H&M, and Nike, etc. The reason is because they have more reasonable labor regulation than India. Actually, India should take advantage of abundant human resources. Human resources are India's comparative advantage. However, India's successful industry is capital-intensive or high-skilled labor-intensive industries, such as refineries or IT or business process outsourcing, etc. The reason is because India's labor regulation is too strict. To take an example, actually, for example, the labor reform is a very big step, but that is not enough. For example, if the number of company workers are more than 100, they cannot cut off laborers without permission from local state. The threshold was increased from 100 to 300, but this is not enough. Please see the scale of apparel factory in Bangladesh. I want to recommend that Northeast states increase the threshold to 10,000 staff. That can be a big incentive for foreign big companies to come to Northeast region. And finally, I want to point out the importance of improving safety in Northeast regions. Honestly speaking, I somewhat hesitate to say, but as a friend of India and the Northeast regions, I decided to share the fact. As of now, the image of Northeast region is a dangerous place for Japanese companies. The reason is because we saw Prime Minister Abe's picture was burned in the central area of our city on December 2019, and that was broadcasted broadly in Japanese TVs. So, and that visit was unfortunately postponed due to that turmoil. Actually, that fire gave us a very scary image. And the safety is the most fundamental factor that can cancel out every other economic benefit. Then, how we can overcome and what should we do together? So I want to propose it is necessary to sincerely analyze the level of safety inside those areas in a very precise manner. We should show everything objectively. So it is effective to map the safety level according to the past track records and accumulation of the number of turmoils or accidents, etc., for each small regions. And we can compare, for example, this area is at least safer than other area, or like that. Those information will help invite companies. So we should not escape. We should not escape from logically persuade companies by showing the track records for each area. And finally, METI and JETRO are willing to help attract Japanese companies enter into Northeast regions. In order to do that, we need the support from local government. We have to persuade that the destination has more preferable incentive, cheaper land cost, good connectivity to main roads, etc. We have to verify, compared to other states, well, other countries also, this is the best destination. So let's make it happen. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Onozawa. This was a very, I would say, very insightful presentation, and especially the way you placed the perceptions of some of the investors on how they are looking at Northeast as a destination. This is very, very critical, and I have some very interesting takeaways from this. What you also raised are some of the red flags on what essentially hinders doing business in the Northeast. So, in fact, we in economics often use the term the transaction cost of doing business. These are some very, very critical transaction costs which might not enter the monetary metrics as such, but definitely has a huge bearing on business environment. So as far as safety is concerned, that is, of course, one very, very critical element. And until and unless the safety is taken care of, naturally, no foreign investor is going to invest money in a particular destination. Also, in fact, what you raised is something that we are facing all across India. And one of the reasons why I felt that often I keep on writing about this, that the cost of doing business also emerges in the form of the cost of some of the outmoded labor laws that we still have in India. And that is also because these are at certain times, these regulations are guided by our very federal structure, which gives states the power. So that also, despite a bill that has been passed in the parliament and has now become an act in 2020, there are a host of labor reforms that labor market reforms that need to be conducted as far as India is concerned. And of course, this is a work in progress. And this is, of course, going to happen. And labor laws actually raise the cost of doing business. No doubt about that. This is something that labor economists have been talking of for ages. But with that, I would just like to come to, prior to coming to Professor Taneja, may I request Professor Bhattacharya to intervene, more so because possibly you have to leave early, ma'am. Professor Rakhi Bhattacharya, would you like to intervene at this point in time with your presentation?
I think we will do it later. Let the panel be complete. Not at this point of time. I don't have anything to say.
Do you have to leave early? In that case, you can. If you don't, then we will go as per the schedule.
No, maybe after Dr.
Okay.
Professor Taneja.
Okay, then that is fine. Okay, Professor Taneja. Now that I leave, in fact, I hand over the baton to you for your presentation. 10 minutes, please, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Nilanjan. I enjoyed listening to our earlier speaker. It was very, very insightful. Now, we all know that the Northeast region has 98% of its border with neighboring countries, with Bangladesh, Myanmar, Bhutan, the Tibet Autonomous Region, and with Nepal through north of Bengal. And its close proximity to these countries should actually provide an opportunity to develop value chains and become part of the cross-border production network. So that should really be our vision. And the Northeast is well endowed with natural resources, oil, gas, minerals. It's also rich in flora and fauna. It has the perennial water flow through the Brahmaputra. And it actually has, in terms of its structure, most of the states actually are predominantly agriculture, and manufacturing occupies a smaller share of the state GDP in all these countries. So we need to keep that in mind when we're looking at trade and development in the region. I will argue, in fact, even with all of the assets of the Northeastern region, it remains underdeveloped. In fact, in the last 20 years, the per capita state GDP in the Northeast grew slower than the national average of 5.6%, except in the states of Sikkim, Mizoram, and Tripura. I will argue that impediments emanating from our trade policies and our inadequate trade infrastructure have hindered the growth and development of the Northeastern region. And identifying and addressing these barriers can help the Northeastern region to become the centerpiece and the fulcrum for India's Act East policy. Both on the trade and connectivity front, a number of initiatives have been taken. On trade, we now offer zero duty import to all the LDCs under SAFTA. We also have normalized trade with Myanmar since 2015. In fact, these initiatives have coincided with the reduction in violence and decline in insurgency in Nagaland and Manipur, and this has created an overall better environment for trade. On connectivity, there have been massive strides with Bangladesh, signing of the motor vehicles agreement, and also ratifying the trade facilitation agreement actually has opened a window of opportunity for the Northeastern region. In fact, in our trade facilitation action plan, we have highlighted specific measures that would connect the Northeastern region to our neighboring countries, and these are actually TFA plus measures. So that's the kind of emphasis that we are laying on connecting the Northeastern region with the rest of the world. But also on connectivity, I think a lot of initiatives have been made specifically with Bangladesh. Access to Chittagong and Mongla seaports in Bangladesh are critical to opening shorter and alternative routes. There has also been a huge progress in connectivity in waterways. We've had an amendment to the India-Bangladesh protocol, and 7 additional ports of call have been added. And what this has meant is that the inclusion of Sonamura-Daudkhandi stretch will improve the connectivity of Tripura and adjoining states with India and with Indian and Bangladesh economic centers. Jogi-Jopa also in India and Bahadurabad in Bangladesh as new ports of call will provide connectivity to Meghalaya, Assam and Bhutan. Jogi-Jopa is actually very important because it's going to be a multimodal logistics park, and this will actually garner a lot of activity within the Northeast and is going to be a huge nerve center in Assam and would provide the impetus for the entire Northeastern region. There are other improvements also. Haldibari-Chiraghati rail link, which is the 5th operational rail link now. So there are several of these initiatives that are actually coming together which we hope will provide seamless transportation in the Northeastern region. Now, the land customs stations and the integrated checkpost are very crucial, are a crucial node in the trade infrastructure. Our land borders are very complex, and each land border has its unique characteristics. So we have integrated checkposts, we have functional land custom stations, we have non-functional land custom stations, and then on the India-Bangladesh border, we have border hearts, and then we also have several informal trading markets along these markets. And this kind of informal trade has been taking place for decades, and it's actually based on mutual trust. And sometimes we also have instances of quasi-informal trade, where informal trade is actually facilitated by official agencies, where they have actually provided a safe and secure environment for informal traders. There is an instance, for instance, in Gelefu on the India-Bhutan border of this kind of an institutional arrangement between informal and formal agencies. Also, trade with Bangladesh, Myanmar and Bhutan takes place under different border agreements. The India-Myanmar border trade agreement was guided until recently by the India-Myanmar trade agreement, under which only 62 items were permitted to be traded. However, after 2015, there has been a shift to normal trade. But interestingly, what the notification says is that there will be normal trade through Moreh. So what does that mean for the rest of the border between India and Myanmar? And what we find is that in places like Pangsu and Zukha Tower, trade continues to take place under the earlier agreement, in which only 62 items are being traded. And at the same time, India-Myanmar also comes under the India-ASEAN agreement, and Myanmar also gets concessions from India under the duty-free preference scheme. So that's the kind of trading environment that we have on India-Myanmar. And the reason why I am talking about the nitty-gritties is that unless we think of making the border active, we're not going to be able to establish corridors within the Northeast that would give us larger benefits. Then that was the India-Myanmar border trade. Now on India-Bangladesh, trade takes place under SAFTA and under the duty-free tariff preference scheme. India-Bhutan is very different. Trade takes place in a very free environment, and the transit agreements, protocols and procedures are also very free and easy, not restrictive at all. If we compare this with how much effort has gone into the transit agreements with Bangladesh and with Nepal, this one is very free and not at all restrictive. But for the northeastern region to take advantage, all these restrictions will have to be removed. For instance, the India-Myanmar agreement for normal trade would need to be rectified. Also, in the case of India-Bangladesh trade, there are port restrictions imposed by the Bangladesh government, where only a handful of items are permitted from the land custom stations of Sutarkandi, Agartala and Srimantapur. All of these three are located within the northeastern region. And this is in contrast to the policies that are followed at seaports, where there are no such restrictions and all items are permitted to be traded through the seaports. And so it's not surprising that if we look at the northeastern region's trade with its neighboring countries, we find that exports account for 60%, whereas imports account for 40%. So whereas if you compare this with the overall trade balance between India and Bangladesh, we find that there is a huge trade imbalance in India's favor. And that's not the case if we look only at the northeastern region. So these specific policies that are being followed only for the northeastern region need to be highlighted, and particularly in the context of the upcoming India-Bangladesh talks, and considering that we do have a very good relationship right now between India and Bangladesh, this should be rectified, because if we're thinking of seamless transportation, then trade flows have to be increased, because otherwise what will the transport system or the logistics system carry unless we remove the trade restrictions along these borders and between countries. Of course, while then there are other impediments which are common to the entire northeastern region. For instance, there are no banks. at the land customs stations. And particularly on the India-Myanmar border, there is a problem because on the Myanmar side, the Myanmar traders cannot get bank guarantees due to a weak trade finance mechanism. There is also lack of digitization at all the integrated checkposts, and this is a major hurdle because not only does it mean that we can't have paperless trading, it also means that we can't employ modern risk assessment methods at these major land ports, and none of the agencies that are actually involved in facilitating trade, like the Ministry of Commerce or the Ministry of Home Affairs or the security agencies or the custom authorities, none of these actually would be dealing with this problem. So it's a generic problem for the northeastern region and would actually fall under the development plans of the northeastern region. Similarly, for instance, if there's lack of internet connectivity, we all know, is really poor in the northeastern region. So these two basic infrastructure requirements, banking and digitization, need to be taken up at the state level within the northeastern region. And somehow all of this needs to be coordinated, because unless the development agencies and the trade agencies come together, we will not have a holistic picture. And one institutional mechanism that we can have for having something like this is that we have set up a Center for Act East Policy in Guwahati. And maybe that could be the central agency that could do this coordination between the development factors and the trade factors and the agencies involved in these activities.
Nisha, can you just wrap up in 2 minutes?
Yeah, okay.
So
basically what we need is then a framework for our land borders also. What I would suggest is that we have international gateways, so about 3 international gateways, say on the India-Myanmar border, and maybe 3 international gateways on the India-Myanmar border and the India-Bangladesh border, because right now there is we have a disproportionate number of gateways on small, medium and large on the India-Bangladesh border, but virtually none at the India-Myanmar border. So at any point in time, we do need to have the larger vision of connecting the Northeast to both of these borders, and we need to lay equal emphasis on both of these. In particular, on the India-Myanmar border, I think we need to include not just Moreh, but along with that Zorinpui and Arunachal through the old Stillwell Road, where we can have an international gateway. So that, I think, would bring it on par with the activities that we are following on the India-Bangladesh border. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Nisha. A host of suggestions, a host of pointers came out. Especially from the perspective of the hard physical capital and how essentially trade and development can be enabled. And also you talked about an institutional mechanism by way of which the processes can be enabled further. And what is also critical is that you talked about a holistic approach looking at the entire developmental paradigm of the region. So with that, let me come to Professor Rakhi Bhattacharya. Professor Bhattacharya, this is time for your presentation, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thanks to the organizer for this opportunity. I would like to begin by understanding the idea of Northeast. Why is it seen as a strategic geography, and whether it is a sustainable idea or not? So I will mostly problematize the inner Northeast, the frontier, which needs careful attention for producing such larger transspatial narratives that we are having now. Now, we know that economic liberalization era is marked by, number 1, increased transnational engagement, number 2, with an epistemic priority in the region-making approach, and number 3, with production and reproduction of geographies. And I think in South Asian context, India's northeast that shares only 8% landmass has immense locational advantage for interlinkages and accessibilities, has become one of the most strategic neoliberal geographies for theorizing this idea of region and sub-region in this transspatial sense. And we also seen that in last 3 decades, India has profusely recognized this geography and reconfigured it as a gateway of economic expansion, precisely since 1996-97. And in recent times, of course, since 2014-15, the attention has been manifold under the current influential logistic and trade regimes to augment the engagement with the immediate and extended neighborhoods and the geographies. In a way, it has gained a new regional infrastructural identity. Now, we know why such new production of geography was essential for India, but we ought to know objectively, what actually has happened there and how far this new idea of economic geography can be a sustained concept. And of course, trade is a very important parameter to test this assumption. So my presentation will have 3 sections. I will talk quickly in the first section about the trade as a state project from above that Professor Taneja has already spoken. So if we consider the hypothesis that India's region-making endeavor has been primarily to create a sustained supply chain and to enhance the formal trade volume through Northeast Gateway, then both we know ASEAN and BIMSTEC are the most important sub-regional forums to examine it. And I have taken 1996-97 as the beginning year as India became a member of ASEAN Regional Forum, and BIMSTEC also was initiated during that period. And then I just calculated some of the compound annual growth rate figures, trade figures in 5-yearly terms till 2020. And to check the trend of Lucist and Actist policies. And if Amber can show the slide, it is better. Otherwise, I can just say very briefly that the will he be able to show the slide or yes? So I have just estimated this trade growth rates, and you can see that these figures unfold. One can see that it has grown substantially till 2007 to 12 period. The peak was second phase of Lucist policy with 30% growth. However, the growth figure have come down to single digit since 2012-17, though there was a clear policy continuity under the Actist policy, in fact, with more push and aggression. So I thought year 2020 was an exception due to rising global trade war and virus-led pandemic. So I alternatively estimated till 2019 and found that the growth figures are much better with 19% for 2017-19 and 9% for 2014-19. Then I come to the BIMSTEC and I saw that there was a similar increase in the growth, if you can come to the a growth till 2007 to 12 and then a fall. But here the fall is much lesser than the case of ASEAN. In fact, you can take, if you take till 2019, we see that India has increased its trade volume with BIMSTEC and the growth rate is 18% for 2017-19 and 2014-19, it is 10%, that is double-digit growth figures. So by and large, I would say that India's trade with both these sub-regions have been encouraging. And for Actist period, I think one has to wait for more years to understand the impact in longitudinal frame. Now, however, the question that is more important is how Northeast is figuring in it. Now, I do not have state or regional level trade data at this point of time to empirically talk about it, but the economic survey report mentioned that only 5 states of India accounts for 70% of India's international trade volume, including ASEAN and BIMSTEC, and they are Maharashtra, Gujarat, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, and Telangana. None of the northeastern states figure anywhere in that list. And also another Niti Aayog report mentioned that 95% of India's trade with eastern and southeastern neighbors are with the states and regions other than northeast. So is it that the West and South are dominating trade, making it highly region-specific and skewed? Northeast definitely remains at the margin and periphery of India's formal growth map, and the logistics infrastructure of the region that is seen as the initial condition to boost trade is yet to establish any relation yet. Now, I tested with the interstate trade of the Northeast and the highway data for last 12 years, and I found that the results are highly insignificant. Then I looked at the FDI data from ASEAN and found that the volume has increased over the decades. But what is again intriguing is that till 1919-20, Maharashtra was #1 with 30% FDI, followed by Karnataka, Delhi, Gujarat, and interestingly, Jharkhand comes next, followed by Tamil Nadu. Assam, including all the northeastern states, actually ranked 21st with 0.01% share. So the region that is recently enticed for global investment has hardly made any mark in terms of FDI share. In fact, it has gone down marginally from 0.2% in 2008-9 to 0.01% in 2019. And the three top investors, we know that they are Mauritius, Singapore, and Japan with 30, 21, and 7% shares. And the top sectors are ITs, services, ITs, and logistics infrastructure, of course. So India's improved ranking in parameters like ease of doing business, logistic performance index, FDI in recent times are still not regionally balanced. It is essentially for a handful of core states and for few larger players who are dominating the trade and business affairs in India. And to me, this should be seen more as a structural challenge where power relation and political economy are the pertinent deciding factors. Structurally, West and the Southern region dominate with their business-friendly policies on land, labor, power, and tax. Most importantly, with the established and rich industrial players and their network. Northeast is being emphasized as a potentially neoliberal geography, but has made no significant change yet. So the old hierarchical structure remains with West and Southern region being dominant player, and despite the fact that ASEAN BIMSTEC group of nations are proximate to Northeast and were conceptually understood to benefit this region. Now, this takes me to the second section to speak on border trade and cross-border relation that Dr. Taneja has spoken with the neighboring region. So I will formalize it in terms of in the binary of formal and informal spaces. So we know that official border trade was agreed in 1962 under the Customs Act, but was closed for several decades on geopolitical and security consideration of the Northeast. And only in 1996-97, it was opened with the border trade agreement with Myanmar through Manipur, and the time when ASEAN BIMSTEC engagement were conceptualized. Currently, there are many, of course, land customs stations to do the border trade. If you can come to the third, yes. So I have taken it from IPOI report, Dr. Taneja's report, and you can see that despite this long international border, the official border trade of Northeast with the neighboring countries is very insignificant. It is about 0.1%. And Bangladesh has been the only nation with which Northeast could make gainful border trade, sharing 87%, where the other important neighbor, Myanmar, shares only about 0.01%. But given this geographical and historical specificities, this cross-border relation has been integral to this region and shares economic, ethnic, and cultural intimacies and connections that we need to understand. Exchange used to be a normal discourse amongst the people across the border with subsistence worldview, which I call it a system from below. So border making and sealing projects have extensively affected this transspeciality. But people had to depend on such interactions for their everyday existence, which is perceived as unofficial and illegal practice, and studies have shown that the volume of such practices have multiplied and in much more than the official trade. For example, the official border trade of Manipur with Myanmar, Sikkim with China have gone down merely to 0.01% and 1% respectively, whereas unofficial trade is much higher. And today the unofficial trade components go beyond the traditional items like Chinese durables, drugs, rare wildlife, resources like coal, timber, stone, etc. Now, this is undesirable and negates the ethos and spirit of the traditional exchange practices on which many border economies of Northeast thrived as a collective subject in the past. So how to resolve this paradox? And this takes me to the last section, to see the interfaces and intersection of these two aspects. And if there is any possibility of convergence to make the idea of transspatial Northeast as a sustained one. Now, though the state has been proactive with policies of surveillance and penalties for such trade informalities and aiming for formalization process, but there are still many gaps, and the local factors and nexus possibly are more important here to understand, and various contradictions within the region. And I want to mention few contradictions here. Number one, there are persistent resistance within the region against various extractive operations of resources by the state and investors from outside on valid grounds of ecological and traditional livelihood risks. Whereas in the highland areas of Northeast, one can see rampant extraction of the same by the local elites and illegally being traded with the neighboring nations. This has been a part of their cultural practices and space, and they access to such resources under the constitutional mechanism like 6th Schedule, Article 371, and set of traditional customary laws, which is an exception against the norm, and this implicitly denies the competitive economic and market forces. Number two, one can hear perpetual contestation in Northeast against illegal migrants, while on the ground they are being extensively used as cheap laborers in various economic activities like coal mining with unethical rat hole practices. Number three, there is a long-standing demand for the people for inner line system and regular economic blockades take place to restrain quote-unquote outsiders, while the local stakeholders and elites are interestingly negotiating with state for all kinds of big connectivity projects to enhance mobility within and across the borders.
Now, Professor Bhattacharya, can you wrap up within a minute?
Yes, 2 minutes. Number four, for continuous intra-ethnic conflict and militancy, most of the states, including Assam in recent times, have been declared as the disturbed area under APSPA, while on the contrary, the region is in focus for global investment, industrial production, and trade hubs, which essentially needs a stable law and order condition and market-friendly approach. So how do the investment and trade actually make a way to this gateway, where multiple such sovereign entities operate on the ground against this? Unless such long history of resistance is being addressed with an appropriate and justified institutional and political mechanism, the idea of Northeast making a gateway may not be an achievable goal. So I wanted to talk about Bangladesh and Tripura, but I'm sure Indranil will speak on that. I'm skipping that part. I would like to conclude by saying that these neighbors are pertinent and integral for Northeast, not only to produce a geographical centrality by forging sub-regional logistics links, but also for its own sustenance. It can be a sustained idea of free economic sub-region if connections from both above and below find a meeting ground where state and people can come together to agree on such seamless space to share the prosperity. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Bhattacharya. It's a very holistic kind of a presentation. You talked about ease of doing business and how essentially there is quite a bit of regional disparity as far as FDI movement is concerned. And in the process, how essentially to a large extent, I mean, the Northeast has been bereft of the FDI that is coming to India. So, well, it also, of course, what comes to my mind is that definitely this is a function to a large extent about of ease of doing business and business environment, which our very first speaker talked of. As far as border trade is concerned, those figures are definitely quite illuminating. Now, with that premise, we move to Professor Indranil Bhomik. Professor Bhomik, 10 minutes for you.
Good morning. It's a pleasure for me to be part of this August panel. I thank the chair for giving me the opportunity, as well as I thank Professor Anushwa Madam, because she brought me into this fold. Actually, very honestly speaking, this is not the area that I mostly work upon, but since Madam had asked me to look from the perspective of Tripura, so as you all are well aware that as we consider Bangladesh to be surrounded by India on all sides, Tripura is surrounded by Bangladesh in all sides, and that is where we have to concentrate and take stock of Tripura. Now, we have seen about the trade relations or the Indo-Bangla trade data that has been shown earlier, but if we look into particular the amount of trade that happens through Tripura, we find that there is an overwhelming dominance of imports from Bangladesh into Tripura. The volume of trade, particularly in 2012-13, was around 340 crores, of which the export from Tripura was only around 0.41 crore. Currently, in 2018-19, the volume of trade has gone up to around 540 crores. The export from Tripura is a meager 14 crores, and 522 crores is imports. So there is this overwhelming dominance of imports from Bangladesh, which happens to India, and the major items that comes down to Tripura are cement, fisheries, stones, some food items, as well as plastic goods. But from Tripura, with this meager volume that is sent out, what we send a specific fruit, mostly known as shatkira in local language, and that is also in such a low volume. The border trade, particularly through border herds, the two border herds that are functioning at Srinagar and Kamala Sagar, the items which are traded are mostly handicraft.
Yes, I think he's back.
Yeah, I'm back.
Yes,
well,
please
this is a problem that we face. Infrastructure. There was a power cut.
Oh,
there was a power. Yeah.
Okay.
So what we have. Yeah, I'm sorry. So the items that are traded from in the border herds are also very funny. I don't know whether the word funny is correct or not, but very interestingly, we do find it's supposed to have local products, but we do have industrial products going from Indian side also, as well as there are a lookout for some Chinese products in the border herds also among the. And also we have this substantial volume of informal trade, but these are all very well known and well documented figures by the studies that has been taken up. Now, but yet Tripura, obviously, whenever we consider about the development of Tripura, we have to think in the terms of, we can never ignore Bangladesh in the context. And what I consider right now, are we in a position to consider the southernmost town of Tripura, Shabroom, as the emerging hub? That is the point that I would like to stress upon here, because Shabroom, what has happened in Shabroom is that the first SEZ, multi-sector SEZ in Tripura has been granted, and it is supposed to be situated in Shabroom. The formal inauguration of the site has been done. We are expecting that this will it will be built up with an investment of around 60 to 65 crores, and it will bring in investment, create employment, and obviously the multiplier effects are going to happen. Shabroom also has been connected with rail. It is well connected with the national highway. There is an international Buddhist university which is being set up in Shabroom because of the concentration of a sizable amount of Buddhist population in that region. Also, But what can be the game changer is basically the Moitri Bridge, which connects Shabrum to Ramgarh in Bangladesh. Now, if this really happens, we are all extremely hopeful for, and we are optimistic that this might be the real game changer. But how do we really take the benefits from it? When we talk into the local farmers over there, they fear that if this bridge is operational, there would be floods of agricultural produce from Bangladesh, which is going to have an impact on their survival. The opening up of bridge, I don't know whether this is going to come up, when this is going to come up. I hope this comes up very quickly. But what has happened till now, the LCS in Shabrum is not functional. So we have the bridge, the LCS is yet to function. What is happening right now, since the bridge is completed, this has emerged as a new tourist center in Agartala, in Tripura. A lot of people, every day we go there, there are floods of people in that region who are going to visit that bridge. Well, now this is an area which I would like that this can be, when we talk of trade, we need to think about the other aspect, and this is something which we can really harp upon for the future. Now, in this background, when we talk about opportunities in BIMSTEC, we have to consider that we have an SEZ, we have the connectivity. Obviously, if the bridge is operational, Chittagong port becomes very close to us, and obviously the facilities are very well known to what can emerge. But what do we get? In the SEZ, are we expecting investment from Bangladesh, who has their advantage in their textile and apparel sector? Are they going to come in there? Because if they have their advantage, that can be reaped in Tripura also. Or BIMSTEC can consider Tripura and the Northeast as a wellness destination with health infrastructure coming up to boost up medical tourism. We have medical colleges, we have doctors passing out, but what is the outcome? We find that people from this region are going for better medical treatment to other parts of the country. So why can't we have it in the other way around? We have heard since 2013-14 that Agartala is the third international gateway in terms of net connectivity. But what is the outcome after 7 years? The lines have been laid. But one more point, which I believe where is substantial opportunity, we have to think about the manufacturing sector. But for me, I would stress more upon the service sectors. And when we talk about the wellness destination, when we talk about tourism, I would also like to think the northeastern region with Tripura taking the lead as an educational hub, particularly in the not in the context of higher education. I repeat, not in the context of higher education, but in the context of secondary education, in the context of middle level education. We find a lot of students from Bangladesh as well as other neighboring countries coming to India in the residential schools spread across the country. Can't we have such centers in this region? The weather is best. The weather is better than many other parts of the country. The environment is pristine in a lot of part. So why can't we think of investments of having world-class middle-level educational institutions, which, if they are successful, can obviously attract further investment for higher education institutes, which we can reap in later. Obviously, with better connectivity, with good relation with Bangladesh, with the opening up of the Moitri Bridge, Tripura emerges as a corridor. The ancillary services are likely to increase. But Rakhi madam has already mentioned, and Nisha madam has also mentioned about the prospects of improving waterways through Shonamura Daudkandi line. Now, what has happened? The dredging is yet to be complete. As a result, the expectation that we had that the benefits that are going to be reaped, we could not. So we have starting off projects, but we really need to follow it up and complete it in right earnest. Now, that is very true from the economics point of view. But in addition to economics, particularly in the context of Tripura, we got to keep in mind that we share a commonality with Bangladesh in terms of history, in terms of vocabulary, in terms of ethnicity, in terms of culture. And these are basically points which are going to facilitate even more economic outcomes. When we talk about the LCSs, we see into only the eastern part of Bangladesh boundary. Sir, can I have 1 more minute to finish off?
Yes.
Yeah, I'll just finish off in a minute. We just think about the eastern side of Bangladesh and the western side of Tripura. But there is a huge border in the eastern part of Tripura bordering the western part of Bangladesh, particularly the districts of Khagrachori, the districts of Rangamati, as well as parts of Chittagong. Now, what is happening there? We talk about the cultural affinity between the Bengali-speaking population of Tripura and the Bengali-speaking population of Bangladesh. But in Bangladesh, there are a number of sizable population of Chakmas, there are a sizable number of Mogs, there are a sizable number of Tripuris, and we have sizable number of this indigenous population in Tripura, and the similar kind of ethnic, the similar kind of cultural relationship exists in the other side also. So this is also an area where we need to think upon, and when we are making a holistic plan, we need to think in that line. That's my take. And to wind up, I submit that Tripura played a major role in Mukti Juddho. This is 50 years, and this is also Mujib Borsho. There is a huge sentiment in Bangladesh about Tripura, particularly the role played by the state during the 1971 war. And I don't know whether that is going to come up in reality, but there is a proposal to have a chair in Tripura University in the name of the founder of Bangladesh, Sheikh Mujib. And also we have proposed to set up a Center for Bangladesh Studies in Tripura University, which I think can play a big role in fostering in Indo-Bangla relationship with special focus to Tripura. But nonetheless, the optimist that I am, I believe the infrastructure push has to continue, particularly in Tripura. The airport is being modernized. The airport is being used as a transit by a lot of Bangladesh citizens, particularly the districts of Brahmanbaria, Kumilla. The nearest international airport for them is Dhaka, or moving down to Chittagong. But it is much cheaper for them to come to Agartala and take flights to other parts of India. So, and this is having a multiplier effect in the hospitality sector of Tripura, which obviously had a tough time because of COVID. But I believe with the easing out of things, this is going to improve. The railway link, we are obviously hopeful that Agartala-Akhaura link will have a huge impact. But in the context of infrastructure, when we talk about Tripura, we also have to keep in mind about the immense need of increasing good quality storage facilities in this state, which we severely lack. And if that is not done, obviously the trade linkages cannot prosper as expected. The second point which I would like to finish off with is the entrepreneurship zeal has to be there in the local region, and that is something. Can we think of in this way of inviting homecoming of the out migrants? Particularly in the last 20 years, we have seen a lot of out migration from the northeastern region to other parts of India across the world, and many of them have done brilliantly in their prospective careers. Can we expect initiatives in inviting homecoming for them so that their expertise is used for building up opportunities in future? But this can only be successful provided the governance is prudent. We have to be very careful with pseudo investors. Tripura has had very bad experiences with such kind of investors and such kind of groups that had come in. We also need to be careful about the dumping. And last but not the least, the political will and bonhomie with neighbors is absolute necessary so that the vulnerable population, it is very true, we know that our region is laggard, our region are deficit marked, and also our region, poverty is there in this region, as well as Tripura also has one of the highest unemployment rate in the country. So prudent governance is something which is absolutely necessary. But last but not the least, the optimism in me says that we have good days in future because Agartala has emerged as the topper among the northeastern cities in terms of the ease of doing business. That has come out last week. So I feel keeping good relation with Bangladesh, obviously we'll have a lot of multiplier effects, not just only in terms of trade, but to the overall development of the state as well as the region as well. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Indranil. In fact, quite a few interesting things. You talked about the intertwining nature of the cultural drivers with the economic drivers with development, which is very interesting to look at. In fact, which Professor Bhattacharya and Professor Taneja talked about issues related to ease of doing business. There's something interesting that I'd like to mention in here, that around 2 years back, from ORF, we conducted a research on devising an SDG index. And out there, we came up with something very interesting, that essentially, in whichever state you find that the performance on sustainable development goal indicators are better, or the SDG index is better, those are the states which are attracting private investments more, especially Goa and suppose certain parts of Western India. And this index was a much more holistic index, much more, I would say, a better index than what was developed by Niti Aayog on two counts. First of all, we took into consideration a host of threats, because it's not always the positive elements that we have to take into consideration. There are negative elements also that need to be taken into consideration. As also, so frankly speaking, SDG creates enabling conditions for doing business. So once you concentrate on some of the critical development indicators, possibly you are going to have a better ease of doing business, not in the traditional way that the DPIIT and the World Bank are thinking of it, but in fact, we tested this with one of the indicators developed by the National University of Singapore and found that there's a very clear, statistically significant causality. So anyway, now that we have a whole premise created for Professor Praveer Dey, who is definitely waiting for a long time, I now have to pass the baton to you. Professor Dey, the field is all yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Nilanjan, and also to, the co-panelists. I think I'm audible. You know, I don't have.
You are audible, but you are not visible.
Yeah, I would rather request you to listen my, just a few minutes talk, and then, if there are any questions, and then video may be off for the time being. There are some issues. Right now, when you shared with me that the background note, there are 4 questions. First, and I will try to answer one of them, and if maybe 2. First one, when you ask the questions like, is India's temporary withdrawal from RCEP a lost opportunity for the region? I mean, northeastern region. You have written the temporary withdrawal. A couple of things, those who are handling trade, and yourself and your colleagues, to me that this is a subject of a further study, particularly focusing northeast. You know very well that when you do a trade agreement, trade by constitution, it is a central subject, so states are not consulted. No, and when we sign an agreement with a foreign partner, then trade agreement gets ratified, protocols framed, it becomes come in effect, and there are bylaws and all. I wanted to say that this whole discussion, the state and center on international trade is an old issue, but there is no channel of discussions officially, because it is by constitution, Schedule 1 is Ministry of Commerce, this is the Government of India. But time has changed, and I think, and I found when it comes to northeastern states, they are international trade because they share 96% of the India's international land border. There I found that the states, particularly Assam, I had an opportunity to discuss with Assam government for quite a long time, then Manipur, and also in other states, Meghalaya, for example. So what I found that more and more states are taken on board. So the opportunity lost for the Northeast is that the states, they don't have capability to contribute. They come with lots of rhetoric and lots of emotion, but putting it into a very shrewd trade negotiation, memorandum is difficult for the Northeastern states to contribute. So that's why, that when we talk about Act East policy, renewed Act East policy, which are not merely, just a nomenclature, I found more Northeastern states are joining. So why it's a lost opportunity? Because the Northeastern states are losing or not able to improve their capability because the consultation process from Delhi to the state capital is rather thin and they don't appear. And where they're gaining, if when you talk about RCEP is a closed chapter, it is not a temporary withdrawal, it is a permanent withdrawal. So where we are losing the Northeastern states, I think their loss is, getting managed, or your loss is wiped out, but some benefits that they are getting, which is through ASEAN-India Free Trade Agreement. After all, Northeast and Myanmar, they are, you can say the land bridge, and these, be it an RCEP or ASEAN-India FTA, the Myanmar is the, the common part, both. So the Northeastern states should be more concerned about ASEAN-India FTA, which is being presently, for the information and maybe for the record, ASEAN-India Free Trade Agreement in the goods are being reviewed, not renegotiated, but reviewed. Here comes an opportunity for the states with more facts and figures and less emotion to join and participate in the discussion process. Tell to the governments in Delhi, hang on, you cannot do an unilateral discussion without a Northeast. That's the point number one. Second is, what are the products? We did a study, field study, and that study is not from Delhi. We live the jackets in Delhi, and then we go in Northeast and train the local people, the tribes, and tell them to go and do the survey. So while doing that, we spent considerable time in training the local students, scholars, practitioners to get acquainted with our study. And when we did it for the government of India and other states, we found a couple of the products which have huge potential for export, but they could not do because the border is open and there is, informal trade coming. For example, all tiny industrial parks and estates around Imphal. We counted about 50, just for the sake of just in the discussion, several small units on the plastics, be it a carry bag, be it a plastic products, PET bottles. There is a huge demand from the Myanmar, particularly Myanmar South, western provinces like Sagaing, but they could not export because the border is open and there is a threat coming from another third country. On top, these small, tiny producers, manufacturers who are paying in about 18 to 28% of GST, the government, they are unable to expand their business because the border is open and there is an illegal, informal contraband always sneak into the Manipur, particularly to stop their domestic production. So what we see, since the border is not properly manned, with the help of insurgent groups, you cannot, engage into industrialization process through which can generate, jobs and leads to the reduction of the poverty. So this cycle, we need to break. Here is a strong role, not the government of India much. It is a strong role of the state governments, state government officials, and the people who are working. They need to come little less to Delhi for shopping. Let them spend more time in the locally and look at all this nitty-gritty and micromanagements. For example, the export of pork. You speak to Arohan, the food processing unit in Guwahati, which was set up by some of the startup firms. By that I am guys in Bangalore. I am Bangalore guys, the Arohan company, the frozen food companies. They're competing with ITC, they're competing with Godrej, and they have an ambition to export huge amount of frozen pork in the neighboring countries using ASEAN India FTA. But they cannot do because cold chain is not there, illegal trade is there, and there are insurgent groups. And I can go on giving steel products and all these things. So in short, RCEP, which is in withdrawal, which is a different, is not really in that way, trade opportunity lost. But I think the, more requirement would be for the northeastern states and their people, the government in particular, and the private sector to look at ASEAN-India free trade agreement, which is being discussed, presently reviewed. Last one, and then I close. The point number 2, which you talked about, that with enhancement in technology aiding economic process. Excellent point. And I think we haven't dealt this point number 3. See, if you go to the South Korea in the winter time, the fire burners, the charcoals are used, and who is supplying most of it? This has come from the Mizoram states, the bamboo products. So, but this is an item which needs a specialist logistics, from full container load. How can a container go to the hilly areas in the northeastern part, and where will they, to be shipped? So these smart logistics, sorting center, all these things are very important. We need to discuss that this technology is not actually extended. And then another one which is missing completely in the Northeast, they are the horticulture powerhouse, they are the processed food powerhouse, but they are, most of it, since they lack of the technology, that's, they don't able to export. Here being, the role of the government of India to bring, put it the Thailand, for example, which are the similar kind of product lines or technology they have, to bring and pick up some of the sectors. Those things are the government of India's jobs, but you need to have a very strong coordination between center and state. Another point, that Bangladesh is the destination in South Asia, right? Please, when you are next visit, please go to a special economic zone, which is next, near to the Dhaka, where the Honda motorcycle, they have set up their plan for the 2-wheelers, and Honda is now planning to do an assembling for the 4-wheeler as well. And I had an opportunity to have some interaction through JETRO and my, that Onozawa-san is here. I think he, if I'm wrong, he may correct me. Japanese have been trying very closely to set up, some kind of parts and components trade within Guwahati, particularly Guwahati, and there's a discussion happening with the Assam government, with the government of India and JETRO, and the Bangladesh government to give a kind of special logistics arrangements to bring that kind of parts or some kind of value chain linkages with Northeast and Bangladesh. So this is where you need a very strong leaderships, political leaderships, as well as others financial support. Just to conclude, that you have asked in a mail that what kind of way forward, can we take up some, if you'd like to give some kind of a laundry list to the government of India and the state governments, what can be done. One is the border heart, very good, excellent, lots of PhD thesis, but border heart is good for cultural relations. We need to go beyond border heart, and the great example that we have, and ID JETRO scholar, great Isida-san, I think he has already spoken some other sessions here. He had plenty of papers he has written. Look at the Mekong region, sub-region, and moving from border heart to border economic zone. I think this is where the present discussion happening, and Shillong Sylhet to start with. This is not to fence border economic zone and economic zone. This is where the Northeast should give an idea. Second is the state level production link incentive. That production link incentives, it is the main driving force for Make in India or Make for the World. So why not the state level production link incentive? And let's start with friendly states in the northeastern region to bring FDI. State level institutions, every time in Delhi, are the most of the queries that come from the Northeast. Why not we go to Northeast? We have been written, why ORF, Kolkata, or ORF doesn't have a chapter in Guwahati, or not in Guwahati, maybe in a difficult post where you can do better, maybe in the place of Aizawl. So this kind of institutions will lead an anchoring country where the Japan, it may talk a little bit, Delhi centric, Japan involvement, but I strongly feel Japan is an honest country coming here, and they have a very strong cultural relations and business relation as well, because Bay of Bengal region means it is Myanmar, Bangladesh, rising Bangladesh, Myanmar, northeastern regions, one country which can connect all of them. So there is a strong role of Japan. Just for your information, the last half a minute is that 6 sectors which have been presently, we're going in a little deeper in some other occasions, and I have an opportunity to share with you that health, for example, the Sagain province people, the huge amount of arsenic problem. They have a huge, most of them, eye issues. They have vision lost. Many of them, they have a suffering from vision, early age vision loss. Then gallbladder stones, cancer, all the kind of thing. One gentleman and his office at Imphal, it's called Dr. Palin, and he's setting up a health city and going all the way to the border, and where he is collaborating with another Myanmar's party to set up an health facilities at the border so that Myanmar they don't come. So health sector in looking at the Myanmar is the Manipur, looking at Bangladesh is the Guwahati or Assam, tremendous opportunities. So this is where we need a state level more incentives, like production linked education, pharmaceuticals. Do you, just for example, Sikkim, just next to Rangpo, you go, there are 23 big pharmaceutical companies, big clusters. Sun Pharmaceutical, their plant coming up in Thilawa SEZs in Myanmar. Then Cipla and many others. They are supplying the drugs in the post-COVID period. They will be doing more probably. So here comes, sort of in BIMSTEC or Bay of Bengal cooperation in pharmaceuticals, where Northeast will be the lead region. Tourism, transportation, construction. So these 5-6 areas where if we promote, not that each state, Northeast and 8 states, they compete each other like in mini India. If they have a huge overlap. If everybody to be the champion for everything, so actually then rest of the Indian states will gain out of it. So Northeastern states then will feel, Maharashtra or Gujarat or West Bengal is using as a transit purpose. To avoid that trap, I think Northeast need to sit down together. They need to identify their best practices and their advantages, and accordingly they share the responsibilities and jobs. There is a very strong role here, the think tanks like ORF and any Niti Aayog and other organizations which can guide them very well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Dey. In fact, only this year we are planning to have a conference in Mizoram. So just for your information, because you mentioned that point, this is already in our bucket list to have our presence out there. So anyway, I think quite a few interesting points came out, and naturally that leads to a host of questions and leaves opportunities for discussions and debates. Now, in fact, when you were mentioning about both Make in India as also the sectors, the 6 sectors that you mentioned, of them, majority of them seem to be in the services domain rather than, in fact, to be classified as manufacturing or the industrial domain. If somebody actually segregates or classifies the various verticals under Make in India, one can easily make out that out of the 25 or the 26 priority areas, at least 17 to 18 belong to the services domain. Now, it is also a fact that from 1991 over the last 3 decades, if we look at India's development trajectory or the growth trajectory, services have been the prime driver. It's somehow, the kind of transition that happens from the primary sector to secondary sector to the tertiary sector, that didn't happen. We directly moved from the primary sector to the tertiary sector, and that movement was organic. It has not been a policy driven or a well thought out policy that services are going to be the driving force of the Indian economy. Now, as far as the Northeast is concerned, how do we really conceptually, as you stated, that it should not be looked at merely as a transit point, or suppose say just creating some kind of a passage of the BIMSTEC or suppose say the broader, or suppose say the whatever region we talk of, ASEAN or whosoever, towards the what we call quote unquote mainland part of the country. So so now these are some of the critical questions that also arise given the presentations that we heard. And even if we have to develop that as a critical service zone, or suppose like many other parts of India, say Bangalore, of course, IT and IT enabled services, then definitely the ease of doing business and other indicators, social safety, social capital, we have a huge pool of human capital, a huge pool of natural capital that remains unexploited. So, and not only that, it's not only a huge pool of human capital, as far as the East and the Northeast is concerned, it's also cheap human capital as compared to the West and the North or the South. So that remains largely unexploited, maybe because of the host of transaction costs that are already existing in the entire scheme of things. So with that, rather, there are already questions that I can see in here, two very important questions. One, the first question is to Onozawa-san. Will Japanese proposed connectivity, safety, and so on in the Northeast for their projects and industry run parallel or in conjunction with BCIM? Could you please elucidate? This question is from General Ramesh Chopra.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you, General Chopra, to give me the question. Actually, I have a very regular interaction with him, and he's one of my best teacher in India. So I will answer the question. Honestly speaking, doing business in India, namely investing to India, those companies have more effect on the security compared to those companies who is participating in the construction activity for the infrastructure or connectivity project. Because in the construction business, it's just several months to stay in that area, and they will shift to another area continuously. On the other hand, when a company invests or, for example, build an office or factory in that area, they have to stay there for at least 5 years, and in the maximum maybe 20 years or 50 years even. So in that case, they have to assess every risk very carefully in the long term. So yeah, this is my answer.
Okay, that's quite precise. Now there's another interesting question that has come from my young colleague Roshan Shah, and rather this is for the panel as a whole, and I'd like the panel to respond to this in whatever way they deem appropriate. This is Roshan asks, although there is no doubt that the Northeast is rich in natural and human resources, increased economic activity is observed to have a detrimental effect on the environment and society when the appropriate social and environmental costs are not internalized in the decision-making process. In this context, how can one envisage a policy of sustainable trade and development, especially in the context of the Northeast, which is also rich in natural biodiversity and home to several ethnic communities? So maybe we start with Onozawa-san. It's a very, very critical question in relation to conservation and development issues, as also, in fact, retaining the cultural diversity.
Yeah, I think, yes, that point is very important. And also, there is a huge potential to contribute from Japanese companies to take advantage of their technologies. For example, we have a lot of technologies to save energies, namely very efficient power generating technologies, etc., using some biofuels, etc. For example, we have a lot of good machineries which can contribute to save emissions of CO2s, etc. So I think in order to achieve that public goals, there are more rooms to collaborate between India and Japan. And honestly speaking, there are several projects that I was consulted with Japanese companies, and we are assessing how we can achieve that. So yeah, let's make it happen together. Thank you very much.
Professor Taneja? You are muted. Can you unmute yourself? Right?
I would reiterate what Mr. Onozawa said, which is that technology will play a huge role, and no better collaborator than Japan to help us tide through this and lead us on the path of sustainable development. But if we are talking about sustainable development, then we're also not just talking about environment, we're also talking about the other SDGs.
Yes.
And here I think what you pointed out, Nilanjan, about the northeastern states actually performing better in several of the SDGs, I think that's very telling. And that should actually give development a greater push in the northeastern region, and we need to make the most of it, and we need to ensure that this doesn't degenerate over time, and that we don't lose out on the strength of these indicators as we go along. Thanks.
Professor Rakhi Bhattacharya, are you there?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I also stick to my point. I mentioned, I in fact raised this issue that this is a very sensitive, ecologically sensitive zone. And whenever we push any development program, one has to be extremely careful about this issue and the sentiment of the people. So I always say that it is the demand and expectation of the people which always needs to be factored in at the strategic level. Otherwise, the kind of resistance that we have been facing from this region will continue. Given the long history of resistance, you can see that, the people's movement and people's concern. Basically, the people of Northeast are very close to their resources, very close to their land, emotionally as well as culturally. So this part needs to be taken care of very sensitively, and therefore I think it should be factored in the strategic level. And if the political negotiation actually spills over to people's business, livelihood opportunities, and ecological protection, then definitely that creates a much successful mechanism to have a broader perspective for Northeast India. Thank you.
Dr. Indranil Bhowmik?
Yeah. In Tripura, many of you may be knowing that there was a cooperation with JICA for promoting the two aspects, the ethnic people as well as nature-based sustainable development. So that project or similar kind of issues have been dealt in our state, but nonetheless, the expertise that the indigenous people have regarding using natural resources is something, a boon that we can really use with greater cooperation with experts like Japan. And that is where I would stand to my earlier speakers in the panel, that we have to adopt the best practices from Japan, incorporating the traditional knowledge of the region, who themselves are pretty aware of how to deal with the nature. And but obviously, as I stand to it, political will is very important in this aspect.
Professor De.
Yes, nothing to add. I go by all our panel members. Absolutely. The Northeast is sensitive, so anything we do, first, environmental aspects and sustainability aspects should come first. Not necessarily we need a high-speed train in Northeast, but at the same time we need a faster mobility. So, and there could be, if to bring that mobility, you have to be very concerned about environment. Yes, and there are, it is a restricted zone. So, yes, we understand it. Yes.
May I add one more point?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, I think, I happened to go through one of the ADB infrastructure contracts, and I was very impressed because it takes into account all the environmental concerns. The implementation of the project has, the contract has built-in provisions to ensure that the environment is taken care of. So if they're building a road, they need to take care of all of this. And maybe if we are undertaking projects in India, this is a best practice that we can actually adopt ourselves, because we are undertaking a lot of infrastructure projects ourselves in the northeastern region. So we should, amalgamate these practices into our own infrastructure projects to make them environmentally sustainable. Thank you.
The
Yes,
problem
Professor
is that in practice, there are many things which are happening. Say, for instance, I'm sure all of you have seen recently, last year, during lockdown period, the Dihing project was passed from the ministry, and there was a rampant sanction over this. So that aroused a lot of protests and resistance from the region itself. And we know that there are multiple such projects which are happening, mega dam projects, other projects, which are happening, and which is against the ecological aspect of that region. So people are actually not happy. The local population actually are not happy with this kind of projects. So what I'm thinking, I'm making a point is that, we understand there are advanced technology, green infrastructure, all these things, but we need to come to a level where people's consent is most important to make Northeast as an economic hub or a transspatial region. Therefore, I said that you have to problematize the inner Northeast first. You have to understand the issues of Northeast and people's perspective. Then only the larger goal can be achieved. Thank you.
Professor Dey, I think you wanted to add something
just to
that.
add, some of the states, and example is Manipur. Sometime in the name of environment and protection of the environment, the village head misuse the power. Some of the, for example, acquisition of land in the hill areas, the entire power has been delegated to the head of the village, tribal villages. So also we should be very careful and also look at some kind of, if I may use reforms of all those things that might help you setting up, highways road. Example, the ADB project from Imphal to More, which is presently expansion of the current right of way. Some of the areas in the hill side, after, when we go towards the More, we could not do, ADB and the contractor, they could not do the project well because land acquisition issue, and there the village heads, they create trouble. No, I won't allow this to be happen. And they enjoy huge power. So this is my understanding, but there could be some different explanations from somebody else on the same subject. Yeah, thank you.
Right. So of course, this is a very, very crucial point, understanding the trade-off, and what I presume has also been stated by Professor Taneja, Indonil, Professor Dey, and Professor Bhattacharya, understanding the local cultural nuances and their aspirations, and how those can be integrated in the entire metrics of development. So, and that is essentially how one can actually think of an integrated, holistic approach to the development of the Northeast on the one hand. So now it's not only with the Northeast as such. This the question that Roshan has raised prevails across. I mean, it's a global question that development gets into the way of nature, and eventually the very cultural, ethnic practices and institutions are violated. And now, how do we put this across, in fact, in the monetary metrics? Because in one sense, this increases the cost of doing business in the Northeast. It's not only from the perspective of environment, but when a social movement essentially emerges, then naturally, how do you negotiate with that? So probably the attempt, as all of you mentioned, and rightly so, that it has to be more preemptive and proactive, right from the inception of the project itself, rather than. Indranil, would you like to say something here? Please go ahead. No, you're muted. Just unmute yourself.
Yeah, I just wanted to share one point regarding when we talk about this environment aspect and development. See, there is a lot of argument that rubber plantations, which is well off thing in the northeastern region, and has its certain adverse environmental impact. But even though there are no definite studies on it, but still it is understood that there are certain problems with monoculture. And the ethnic population in Tripura particularly, a lot of them have been rehabilitated through rubber-based projects. That's fine. But even though what happened is in the last 10 years, when 10 or 15 years, when this aspect of forest right ROFR came in and the pattas were granted on forest land, and remember, rubber plantations are not allowed in forest lands. But what has happened, whoever has gone to the land, many of them, in course of their alternative vocations, they want that in their land, the rubber plantation-based projects should be initiated. Now, this is again a very conflicting statement from a lot of people, because see, you are suggesting the people, they are asking for the ethnic indigenous people, they are asking for rubber plantations, even though they are aware that rubber is a monoculture, and with rubber there are certain problems relating to their traditional way of life. But still, the dominance of economic factors because of rubber assured them a steady income. They wanted to go for rubber. Now what has happened? With the recession in the rubber sector in the last since 2012, those who had planted rubber, they are again, now they are not happy with their decision with rubber. So they are caught in a wave that what happened? They wanted rubber. Rubber would assure them money because their traditional way of life was at a sustainable level without money. Now they wanted rubber at the cost of environmental problems because natural forestry was done. So when we are talking of such projects on environment-based issues, I think these aspects have to be kept in mind at the policy level also when we are talking of any particular crops. Why is it that, and even today we are planning for such, and why is it that we cannot go for agroforestry models, particularly in the region, which is going to be again a booster for the entire development aspects of the region and would facilitate trade issues also. Now, this is what I was just thinking, that we talk that the people are aware they should be taken into confidence in course of our development projects. But what if when they take a wrong decision, particularly for issues which has long-lasting impacts? Rubber plantation is a long-duration crop.
So may I just respond to that, Professor Ghosh?
Yes, please.
So as Indranil mentioned, this is a very, very pertinent problem in the region. The kind of industrial agglomeration that we are talking about with the kind of new geography, it is not possible in the highland areas of Northeast simply because there are some constitutional mechanisms like 6th schedule, like Article 371, like customary traditional laws, which actually resist this kind of agglomeration. The local indigenous population have the access to and rights to those resources, and they deny this kind of agglomeration and large-scale production. So therefore, I mean, as I was mentioning, is it a time to revisit this kind of laws, constitutional mechanisms that the region has? If at all we need to push this idea of transspatial Northeast that we are talking about to join the neighboring areas. After all, the kind of transit Northeast making a transit zone will never work, There will be huge resistance from the local population. So you have to take into consideration the people, the region, ecology, everything together. And if it is so, then is it time to revisit these archaic laws and constitutional mechanisms that we are talking about, which is a huge hurdle at this point of time to make industrial agglomeration that Indranil was talking about. Thank you.
I think as we come to the end of this discussion, what we essentially agree upon is that we need to revisit and redelineate our entire development paradigm and the lens through which we are, and of course, Northeast being no exception. This is true for our entire development paradigm of South Asia. Frankly speaking, when we talk about the less developed regions, quote unquote, as in a relative sense, say the Northeast or maybe parts of Eastern India, this is something that we need to keep in mind. So the sectors that we choose, how essentially they are going to be accepted by the local population. Number two, whether that is in consonance with the local culture. Number three, whether that really exposes them to the forces, broader forces of development, not defined merely in terms of the net state domestic product metrics, but the broader developmental parameters defined in the context of the sustainable development goals. So possibly not possibly, rather we should think about Northeastern development from the perspective of SDGs. Infrastructure is needed, but yes, with infrastructure, the infrastructure that doesn't really get into the way of living or disturbs the present equilibrium or the status quo, which essentially is their way of life. That the acceptance has to be there by all means. So with that, in fact, I think on that note, we should come to the end of this discussion because it's already 12:16. And let me thank all the panelists for providing extremely important inputs which are going to be documented, and definitely we are going to come out with a publication out of this. You will be sent across an email for essentially submitting your chapters or papers. We have a plan for coming out with a volume out of this. So now let me thank you yet again. It's been one of the best discussions that I had on the Northeast so far. Thank you. Thanks, Attorney.